Hey guys, we're back, and today we have a new one. This one is so great. I am going to speed through all of the front rolls. I want to thank Mark Boardman at the Epitaph, all my friends at the Wild West History Association, and of course everybody over at BTK, at Billy the Kid Coalition, at BTK.com. So today's podcast has been so long in the making. And I want to give a little shout out. We're going to be talking, actually, we are talking to Mike Mihaljevic. And Mike and I have been friends for a long time. We have a mutual friend named Nancy Sosa. And Mike has known Nancy way longer than I have. And Nancy invited Mike and I and my wife on a hiking trek. And basically we were going to we parked in this parking lot and we hiked down to Drew's station and Drew's home. Now, Mike and I had never met. And for whatever reason, Mike and I clicked. We clicked on all cylinders. And Mike and I, we became friends. We talk a lot. We don't see each other as much as we want to. We just got crazy schedules, but that doesn't mean that we don't talk. And so for me, I want to thank Nancy because he introduced me to Mike and vice versa. And we got down to Drew's station and eventually to Drew's home. Of course, Drew's station is famous for that area, for the stagecoach, the Benson stagecoach robbery, where, Bud Philpott died because Bob Paul reached over and grabbed the reins and I haul for no man. And unfortunately, Bud Philpott passed away. But all of that whole area, Mike and I got to see it because of our mutual friend, Nancy Sosa. So Nancy, thank you. But the one thing is that Mike, I found out, is a researcher, and he is a deep researcher. He searches for the truth at all costs. And Mike has a new book coming out. This is a pre-interview. Has a new book coming out called The Birdcage Theater, The Curtain Rises on Tombstone, Arizona's National Treasure. Now, you can pre-order it for $34.95 at Amazon. It's around 350 pages is what I'm seeing here, around 350 pages through our friends at University North Texas Press with a release date of October 15th, 2024. I urge you to go on Amazon or to a bookseller or pre-order this book. I think it is going to be a massive hit. I have spoken to people that have seen the manuscripts who have said it is crazy insane. It's massive. It's going to change, I think, the way we view the Birdcage Theater. So welcome, Mike. How are you?
I'm wonderful, Mike. Long time coming. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, man. So one of the things that we spoke about this morning was the fact that the reason I think it's going to be insanely huge is that the Birdcage Theater still stands today. We can read about history and a historical event that happened. We can read about the OK Corral, the gunfight on Fremont Street. We can read about Doc Holliday going places and seeing things and touching stuff, as well as all forms of Western history, forts, places, things, events. And here we have a book about the Birdcage Theater, and the Birdcage Theater still stands. Like, you can read this book and then go see it and be able to open up the pages of your book when it comes out and see the black and white photos and the historical photos and look up out of the book and there it is. Like, yeah, what was your inspiration for writing this book? Why take this on?
Well, I've been fortunate enough. I did some work at the Arizona Historical Society and got to work with the actual city archives back actually when Nancy was running it, and was assigned a really fortunate series of tasks regarding the city archives. It got me exposed to what the city records were composed of, the value of them, not just as individual pieces of information, but in their collective powers. So I don't know, getting exposed to what kind of information was out there and learning how to utilize it. You just point those abilities then at different projects. And in the years that I was spending time at the city archives, we were working on some interesting projects. The Birdcage was just kind of like, it's just a business in town. Certainly when you walk in the building, it's unlike any other place, and you hear a lot of stories, and it doesn't take you too long to realize some of the stories conflict, and so you're naturally wondering, well, what's the truth? Well, kind of utilizing access to records and my newfound skill set to delve through them, I just started kind of collecting things. That was about a dozen years ago. And then I would say in the last 8 years, I've ended up kind of stumbling on a collection of unused period resources that directly relate to the building. And that really started the snowball going. I never intended to write a book. Was the farthest thing from my mind. But when that snowball rolled downhill and it started getting really big, there was a point where I thought, well, okay, I've compiled things here that have never been compiled before, that probably won't ever again. And there was so much information, and the stuff I was finding led to other things, and it just kept going and going. It was to the point where this book is basically writing itself, and I felt an obligation to the material. And so that's kind of how the book was born. You kind of mentioned about how cool it is that building is still standing. You can read a book about it and then actually walk into it. And that in itself, the book itself it talks a lot about how the building came to be, its operational period, which was roughly 10 years, and then its role in help resurrecting Tombstone and transitioning into a tourist-based economy. And so when you walk into that theater today, you're still part of its lifespan. And a lot of the things that are in the theater, there's a story behind that. But there's a really interesting story about how that building is even still standing there. I mean, if you really research and delve through property records and the history of a lot of the buildings, particularly at the corner there at 6th and Allen, I mean, buildings were erected and demolished and taken down by the hand of man and nature many times over. That building is the only one that stands. And the reason that still stands is a huge part of its story. It's an absolute miracle that it still stands. And all the factors that contributed to it actually still existing today are part of the interesting elements of its story, even dating back to 1881. And so that's when readers put their face in the book, they're going to be exposed to the whole lifespan story of this building and virtually everybody who was important into its operations, its coming to be, and contributing to its legend in a real way. And a lot of these people and events have never had the light of day before. And so it's really exciting just to get that information out. I think getting long-winded here, but I mentioned to you before or this morning, that when you find a lot of these records, you find so many of them, my job is writing the book was really just to kind of get out of the way and basically allow people the closest contact they can to this information without my interference. And that's what I hope that comes through when people read it.
Well, and if you heard my excitement earlier on, like I am so pumped to talk to Mike. And I'm so happy that this book has come out because it has been a labor of love. It has been years. Now, here's an example. Many years ago, maybe 4 or 5 years ago, I went out to Wyatt Earp's grave, Wyatt's and Josephine's grave in Colma. And Mike, somewhere after Mike and I had met, he had seen the photos, and I think I'd reposted the photos because every time I'm in the Bay Area, I'll swing by Colma. I'll go say hello to Wyatt. I don't have a drink with him. I just go say hello to Wyatt. I get in my rental car and I leave.
Not to cut you off, but in that same cemetery complex,
that's what I'm getting to. That when Mike saw my photo, this is how widespread, and the reason I'm saying this is the reach of the birdcage is that Mike says, "Oh, in that photograph, you're standing there in his grave, like right near his grave are performers that performed at the birdcage. They're buried there." Tell us about that. Don't go into detail about the person, but tell us about that.
Sure. Well, understanding, variety, this kind of taps into like what variety theaters were, and they were, it was an international network of venues, and they were just as storied and romantic, and every bit of Western lore was shoehorned into these buildings in one way or another, much like saloons or gambling halls. but there's really not a whole lot of information out there about them. But they really varied in their quality, level of decency, etc. So researching who the performers were, I found to be, at least researching other venues, other period venues, is that, from the worst run venues that were, dens of vice and crime, to the most upscale variety theaters that had fine art and great chandeliers and really high standards of audience conduct, I found that the level of performers was an amazing metric for if the venue was really good or if it was really bad. And so when you look at the Birdcage, the question is like, well, what end of the spectrum is this building on? And so I went off on this rabbit hole, which literally lasted 5 years, trying to figure out who the real performers were. And you Google online, you're going to find a list of maybe a dozen names. As it turns out, none of them actually performed there. And so it leaves a vacancy. Well, who were these people? So I spent, like I said, about 5 years, and I combed every copy of every entertainment journal from that period that I could find. And these entertainment journals would generally report on the doings that were going on in theaters all across the country. They would also report on other things, entertainment-based, horse racing, maybe other sporting events, walking matches, things that were important at the time. And in that amount of time, I found about 250 names of people that had performed there. And so, well, that's a good start. Now you have to figure out, who are these people? Were they career performers? Were they ne'er-do-wells? What kind of people were they? And so I basically went off on a 250-person manhunt to put together biographies of these people to just basically answer the question, were the proprietors of the Birdcage hiring quality entertainers, or weren't they? And if they were, what does that suggest about the quality, the standards at the Birdcage that would then match up with other industry standards from other venues? So in doing that, some of these people's stories are so fascinating. I actually decided to put these compile these biographies and put them in another book, which I probably will be coming down the line. But, once I answered that basic question, which took me 5 years to answer, you can't help but feel a little connected to these people. I mean, I contacted quite a few descendants and had actually made nice friends with some of them. And I think that the real thing that impacted me while doing that is that there's almost, and I kind of use this term in the book, hopefully it gets past the copy editor, but I call it cartoonification. And through like a lot of these stories and so forth, the Birdcage is almost kind of turned into, these people that were there are kind of turned into cartoon characters that didn't necessarily have a life before or after. But they're real people, and they're real people, and they have real descendants among us, and they have real stories, factors that made them enter the entertainment industry by necessity or choice. And so, it's just natural then to kind of track these people around and see where they were buried and, find locations, maybe other places that are still around where they lived. And in that cemetery complex with Wyatt Earp, there are 4 of them that are buried there, names that people have never known before. And one of them, I actually had their whole story, his whole story written. And I just can't press upon enough. It's just, these people are so fascinating. And a lot of times you end up finding information about what kind of acts they performed. And a lot of times there were musicians. They would write and sell sheet music. I found a couple of performers who, I actually found copies of their original sheet music, and I'm probably working towards getting that reproduced just so people can hear some of the music that was played there. I mean, it's really reconstructing every facet of that place. And it does stem, these people traveled the entire globe, 6 continents, everything aside from Antarctica. They, these people were the real deal, and their life stories are just so fascinating. I couldn't keep them to myself. There was certainly not enough room in the Birdcage, the main book that's coming out this October. So it's, I think it warrants enough focus and interest. Maybe people, I don't know, maybe your viewers will have an opinion on that, whether or not that's something they'd be interested in reading. But that's how that all came about.
Well, I think you teased us quite. Let's be honest. Every researcher that I speak to, and you're the 121st podcast. Every researcher that I speak to says that they write a book, or they're researching a book, and as they're researching, little things get pushed to the side and maybe into another document file or whatever. And then all of a sudden they'll look over and they're like, holy cow, I've got a whole another book sitting here to the side. And they've said that whether it's in notes, whether it's on 3x5 cards, whether it's on a doc
Sure.
file, whatever it is. And it sounds like, without giving it away, because it sounds like, and not giving it away, but, pushing you, saying, dude, you've got enough here to write a second book. Like, is that true?
Oh, there's no question. I mean, there's 250 of these performers. Some of their life's stories are, some of them mirror each other. I certainly haven't explored every single person to its entirety, but there would be enough for multiple volumes of, say you write a chapter, dedicate one chapter to each person's life story, stack 10 of them together. You could write 5 books. And their stories, like I said, they're so interesting. They're so dissimilar. People in the entertainment industry, even now, I think their lifestyles are different than most working people like you and I, and most people listening to this. But then you reverse that, you go back 140 years, and you're living a different lifestyle, but under completely different circumstances, and you're venturing into areas of the world that are not easy to access. You're doing travel on ships and taking stagecoach rides in areas that are not well established, and just the getting around, the living situations. It's so fascinating. I think when it's an unimaginable way to live, and I think maybe that's what makes it interesting. And of course, it all ties into every detail about these people, having it all kind of in my brain. When I walk into that building, I can see these people. I can see some of the acts that they're doing, and it's almost like a gift where you're kind of like the only person that knows this information. And I think that's, if there's a little excitement in my voice, it's really because I can't wait to put that in other people's laps so that they can maybe experience that too.
Well, if you're wondering who we're talking to, we're talking to Mike Mihaljevic. He's got a new book out called The Birdcage Theater. The Curtain Rises on Tombstone, Arizona's National Treasure. This is a pre-podcast, first one I've ever done, pre-book release podcast. You can pre-order on Amazon for $34.95. The release date is October 15th, 2024. It's around 350 pages is what I'm reading. It's through our friends at University North Texas Press. You definitely want to get this one and read it and get it into your collection. And my gut tells me that this book is going to become like a Wyatt Earp anthology, Dr. Gary Roberts' book about Doc Holliday, Casey T. Fertiller's book about Wyatt Earp, and then you're going to have this other one that's going to be a companion book, which is going to be about research. And every time something comes up about the birdcage, you're going to reach over and grab that and open it and read it and deep study it, and maybe even cause you, whoever's listening, to say, I've got to come to Tombstone and I've got to touch this building and I've got to see it and I've got to go inside. Or maybe an event that happened where Mike wrote about, and maybe it's going to be in a neighborhood or a town near you, and you're like, I'm going to get out of my car and I'm going to go research and I'm going to see for myself. And I think that's the important about this book, is it's so big. I want to thank my friends.
I think too, just real quick, Mike, for people listening too, I know there's a lot of people interested in Tombstone. The scope of the book, everything cover to cover is new information. And it doesn't just include the birdcage. There's, some of the reviews that I've gotten is that, there's a lot to be learned about Tombstone in the book that, again, is derived from new information. And I think people who read it aren't just going to learn about the building. They're going to learn so much about the town of Tombstone. I mean, there's so much untapped information, in the resources that the city has available. Also at the county level, and the state level, that I really think anybody interested in Tombstone is going to learn new things, about the town in ways that they hadn't heard before or known before. So I'd encourage people to read it for that reason too.
Well, I want to thank our friends over at the Tombstone Epitaph. One of Arizona's longest running newspaper. Mark and Eric are doing a great job by getting out history and Western history, including Tombstone history, through the Epitaph. Please subscribe by going to tombstoneepitaph.com. Our second family, both Mike and I, at the Wild West History Association at wildwesthistory.org. Roundup 2025 is going to be in Reno, Nevada, and I cannot wait to see you there. Some of the biggest names in Western history are already saying that they're going to be there. I can't say whose names are. It's too far out in case there's changes, but they're definitely telling us that we're going to be there, or they're going to be there. Also, want to thank my friends at the BTK Coalition. All things Billy the Kid at btkcoalition.com. You're going to want to join that group. They're doing phenomenal research in Billy the Kid and Billy the Kid history, and that's at btkcoalition.com. And I'm going to apologize to everybody if I was really loud coming out of the gate. This has been a long time podcast, and we're going to come back. Mike's already said that after the book release, and I've got a chance to read it, he's going to come back and do another one with me, and maybe even two, depending on how much we cover and all that stuff. Maybe two, but for sure, yes.
Sure. Yeah. Oh, there's enough. Yeah. There's enough for multiple books. There's certainly enough for multiple podcasts for sure.
There you heard it. And so I can't thank him enough, and I appreciate all of you listening. You can find me on Spotify and iTunes and iHeartRadio. Make sure you leave a rating and a review. And I believe in Spotify, if you go into Spotify, you can actually ask questions and leave questions. If you have a question, I will write it down. I'll get you an answer, and maybe we'll include your questions and answers in the next podcast, if that's through the Spotify app. And make sure too, I've noticed lately on iHeartRadio, or not iHeart, but on iTunes and Spotify, if you have somebody who's hard of hearing, or maybe you have a loved one who is an older person and they like podcasts, now these podcasts are being done with closed caption. And so you can go in and actually listen while as best you can and read along and see the words and learn something through closed captions. So I'm super pumped about that. As always, I appreciate you guys a bunch. Safe travels, and we'll see you soon.